Hey, what's up? Here we are with another episode of What's Up Conversations. And in this episode, I had a chat with Mark Petty, audio director at Gearbox, and we talked about sound design, audio directing, and of course, the sound of Borderlands 3. Awesome game. So, this was a lot of fun. I've learned a lot of things, and I hope you do that too. Let's cut the chase and get into it. Hello, Mark. Thank you for your time. It's such a great opportunity to talk to you. I'm a music composer and sound designer, and I'm so excited about this conversation because I'm going to learn a lot from you. So congratulations to you and the great team at Gearbox for Borderlands 3. I'm a huge fan of the series, and this game is by far my favorite Borderlands.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Yeah. So first and very important question, who's the kid in the splash screen of Borderlands 3 saying Gearbox?
The logo, yeah. That is the son of a composer, and we worked with this external company to come up with sort of some sonic branding for the logo, and he did that on just a whim, and so Randy really liked it. And it was funny to us, so they were like, okay, we'll go back and we'll do this logo treatment for real now, and we'll bring in some talent for the Gearbox vocalization and all this. And I was like, no, actually that capture was great, and we should just stick with that. But yeah, it was really just kind of an accident that particular thing worked out. That's funny that you bring that up.
Yeah, I hope you guys keep that for like 20 years from now on. That kid is like 30 years old and still there. It's so funny. So, all right, tell me about yourself, Mark. Where did you start, and when did you realize that sound is your passion?
It's funny that you asked that question, because I was actually thinking about this interview when I was driving in today, and I was kind of running through my history in my mind, and I think that at a really early age, I took notice that there were some pieces of music that I would listen to on the radio that really were standouts for me emotionally, and then I started thinking about it more, and the records that I now reflect upon, the production was different, or kind of ahead of its time for those records, and it was really interesting to me how I could listen to some things from that period that were very straight ahead, and then I would listen to these other records that had all of these things going on and all these interesting tones and melodies and various instrumentation, and I think that kind of caught my ear. When I was about 10, I started playing drums, and immediately took to just being a musician. And then as time went on, I realized that I was also interested, going back to those childhood years of production. So when I was, I guess, 18, I went to school and decided to follow that path. And while I was in school, I had the opportunity to do some internships and also a lot of live sound stuff. But the internships that I was able to do, this was in Miami, were for what I didn't know now, or didn't know then, but know now, were for some pretty heavy hitter engineers. And so I had a lot of training, formal training through guys that as I grew up in the industry, gained a lot of respect for. So I did music production for, I guess, a little over 15 years, various records as well as live sound. And I found that like, I get asked the question a lot of like, would you rather play or make records? And I don't know that I have a preference. It was always very even for me, because I felt like both those spaces I could be equally as creative, just in two different buckets. Yeah. So anyway, I was working with a band in 2004 that the lead singer and main songwriter of that band was the audio director for Gearbox. And I did not know that. But we started talking one day, and we had been friends for quite a while. And he said, "Hey, we're working on Brothers in Arms, Road to Hill 30, and I need some sound design support. Would you want a contract for like, I don't know, a year?" And I said, "This sounds fun. Like, I've never done games before. I've always done music." And it was a kind of a learning curve, and I always find that kind of stuff interesting. So I went in and I contracted for like 8 months on Brothers in Arms. And at that time, Gearbox was 30, 40 people, maybe. Really super small team. One audio guy, which was Dave, that audio director. And so after I got done with that contract, had a great time, went back to doing music production for a little over a year. And then he called me in 2006 and said, "Hey, I'm moving on. I'm leaving the company, but we're working on some demos and some milestones for this other game. Would you want to come in and kind of just get them through that?" And I said, "Sure, that'd be awesome." So I came in and did that, and got along really well with the team. Loved the difference in interactive sound design from what I was used to, which was linear. And I just ended up coming on staff as a sound designer, and that was 13 years ago. So, and then I just kind of like worked up through the ranks and became more involved and deeper steeped into games and game development. And I love the change and the shifts of technology that happen and the challenges that creates. Because in other forms of media, television, film, and music, that technology has and those art forms have been around a lot longer than games. So a lot of the things that we're figuring out in games, or were figuring out in games back then, had already been figured out over there in terms of standards and those kinds of things, recording techniques, that kind of stuff. So it was interesting to kind of be a part of the development of the audio side of a new form of media. So yeah, that's kind of in a nutshell.
Yeah. So were you a gamer before joining Gearbox?
Yeah, so I got really heavy into the first Doom that came out, right. And Quake and Descent. I got really heavy into those games. We had the studio that I was working in back when those games came out. They had just started, like DAWs had just started coming online. I don't even think Pro Tools was out yet. And there was like a little 2-track editor. We had a second or a third studio that was just a VO booth and a control room, and they had installed this DAW in there. So after I would get done with VO sessions, I loaded up Doom and started playing, and I just fell in love with it. And that's what kind of grabbed me. Of course, going back further, like playing Pong or the original Atari games and things like that. Those things were fun as a kid, but I think I probably realized that was something that was a big interest when I did start playing Descent and Doom and those kinds of things.
So you said back in the 80s, some particular music inspired you to follow music and sound. What kind of music were you listening to?
Well, the 80s, it was probably more the 70s. Boston, it was a lot of rock stuff. Boston came out with their first record. A band called Manfred Mann came out with Blinded by the Light, which was a remake of a Bruce Springsteen song. Pink Floyd. Those type of records to me were the production on them was way ahead of its time and somewhat experimental. And I was at the time I didn't have a record player. I was really too young. My parents didn't buy me records, so most of what I heard was on the radio. So a lot of that background or a lot of that discovery was more in the commercial rock genre, the AOR genre, than the deep dives into the B-sides and things like that. But But it was records like that really turned me on to sort of understanding that difference between various styles of production and what those meant to me emotionally.
Yeah. So you're the audio director at Gearbox, and what are your duties and your day-to-day responsibility as an audio director?
It's kind of all over the place. I work with the guys when it comes to establishing tone and doing reviews, listening to the content that's going into the game, also helping to sort of spur inspiration or ideas from them about new systems to create based upon sort of things that I take away from like BL2 or Borderlands 2. What did I want to improve on? How can we do that? I'm a big proponent of surrounding myself with people that are super creative and also have a tendency to be specialized, whether that be in WI's implementation or composition or linear post. I find that I learn a lot from them, as well as help direct sort of my takeaways from products that we've released or products that we're working on. I work a lot on our technology, our infrastructure, growing our department. Also, like field recordings. We have a Foley room, a live room here. Our original location was in Plano, which was about 30 minutes away from here. We didn't have quite the infrastructure that we have here. When we built this new building, I worked with a designer, and we came up with 6 control rooms, a Foley stage, a VO booth. We pulled all of our VO in-house, and as well as, especially in Borderlands 3, we were able to source a lot of our own content. We used very little library content, and if we did use library content, it was a layer, and it was not like a focal point. My job is kind of just oversight and to help us move in the right direction, just not for a specific title, but in the future.
Yeah, do you get the time to sound design yourself?
I do. Not as much as I would like, but I still do some sound design. The majority of what I do is linear stuff, cinematics or title cards or those kinds of things. I don't get the opportunity to do a lot of design in game as much as I used to. I did do some weapon content for Borderlands 3, but it just depends on the day-to-day, like what the priorities are.
Yeah, there are many sound designers working under your supervision. So what are the good qualifications about a sound designer? What a sound designer should have to kind of satisfy an audio director, for example? Like coming from just sort of a philosophical standpoint, look for guys who are super passionate about sound design and about audio, guys who really want to explore recording. It's hard to find, just sifting through resumes, it's harder to find guys that have spent a lot of time doing field recording or Foley recording on their own. I think that's a very valuable skill. I would much rather find a guy that reaches for a microphone instead of a library. So that's a big thing. I think that talent or a good ear or good instincts is fundamental. I think you can teach tools, but it's harder to teach instincts and desire and passion and those kinds of just intrinsic personality things. Of course, guys who work well with other dudes and want to learn and want to be a part of that creative process. Those are kind of the traits and qualities I look for in sound designers. Yeah.
Like whether guys use WIs or Fmod or Unreal or Unity, those kinds of things, I don't look at as much. Those are great those are great experiences to have. Either way, given that we're on Unreal, if a guy's worked on Unity, I know that he understands engines, and then past that, it's just really just workflow. So it's really more about sort of their approach to sound design and who they are as a sound designer, and less about the tools.
Yeah, and I think a bit of insanity when you're working in Gearbox. I mean, there are a lot of fun stuff in Borderlands series. I mean, a toilet that farts itself.
Man, that's honestly, that's what's amazing about that series to me is we rarely ever get a no on any of the ideas. It's like wow, that's pretty wacky. Put that in, you know. So there's the palette or the constraints of Borderlands is as a franchise is pretty much limitless. Like if you can come up with it and it feels cool, sounds cool, and it makes you laugh, like that's a great quality. And that makes it super interesting day to day. Like it's never like make thing, put thing in time after time again, you know. We did a ton of redesign for Borderlands 3 with the weapon system, explosion system, music system, all those kinds of things, and it gave us a chance to try out a lot of new techniques as well as new tech. And I think Borderlands 3 in comparison to Borderlands 2, and from an audio perspective, I really enjoy the fidelity of Borderlands 3. And when I say fidelity, I don't necessarily mean like dynamic range or resolution as much as I mean a lot of the things that we created there, especially with the weapon system. Each one has its own personality, and it feels like there's more life to the weapons themselves, which was something that I've always wanted to improve upon as we moved forward. It feels less like a comped sound that's simply playing a file and variations. What it plays now is it's more of a DAW approach, for lack of a better term, but it's various moving parts that all sort of mix together in real time. Yeah. So it's a great franchise to work on. I really enjoy it.
Yeah. So Borderlands is famous for the insane amount of guns that are usable in the game. How do you manage to sound design for every aspect of each weapon in this game?
Yeah. So there's obviously different manufacturers. Within those manufacturers, there are weapon classes. So you have basically an assault rifle, a shotgun, a sniper rifle, a pistol. And then within those, you have varying combinations. So instead of attaching a shot sound to a weapon, we broke the weapon up into parts. Brian Fieser, my senior sound design supervisor, came up with this system, and he basically broke it down into a barrel, a muzzle, a tail, a flash, and each one of those is treated individually. So as you pick up different weapons and they have different buffs or different parts, all of those parts have sounds that will play, and depending upon the combination, because it changes all the time, those sounds change all the time. So it's a much more granular or vertical approach to weapon design than the typical sort of like, hey, I made a gunshot, so every time this weapon fires, it plays this mono sound. Yeah. There's multiple things happening there, multiple sounds playing, and all of those sounds are associated with individual parts, so they all kind of mix together.
That's great. So, what do you think that makes a gun sounds good? What's the key element to make a good gunshot?
That's an interesting question because, like back in the Brothers in Arms series, there was several threads where guys who were actually in the military would talk about the sound of the weapon, the authenticity of it, whether it was authentic or not. And, if you go out, if you have any experience with recording weapons in the field, they don't really sound like weapons that you hear in movies or video games. Right? There's a Hollywood aspect to that, right? So I think what I love to hear in the weapons is I love to hear the mechanical parts of it, and those layers, as well as the shot itself. It makes the weapon feel more organic and feel like something that you're holding in your hand. So I think it's some of those little details in the Foley that really sort of bring the gun to life. Because the shot itself is exciting, but there's only so many ways to present the actual shot or the muzzle itself. You start getting. That's why we sort of went with this layered approach, because it added some variation to the shot, but also we did the same approach with the Foley as well. So, if you change, if the gun you pick up is a Jacobs pistol, it has a sound attached to the breech. But if you pick up another Jacobs pistol and that breech is modded, then that modded breech also has its own independent set of sounds. So that's ever changing as well, just to give people a sense of a new weapon and give better player feedback.
Yeah. So the amount of voices and dialogues in Borderlands 3 is insane. Tell me about the process. How do you approach them, and how do you organize all that work?
Organize is a loose term. We have a great, so Andrew Cheney, which is kind of our dialogue supervisor on the production side of things, does most all of our audio or our dialogue recording in conjunction with Joel, who's our casting director and VO director. And then, it's really just kind of like a back and forth between casting and writing. The writers, like every other part of Borderlands, are pretty free to explore that space. At some point, the number of NPCs got to be too much, and we had to rein that back in. So there are some performance constraints as well as voice constraints, but it's a lot of like the psychos and the other enemies that you encounter, the tinks. We just play with various guys internally, do a lot of rounds of temp dialogue to try to find what works and what doesn't work, so that when we get to the point of actually casting actors and moving forward with the main dialogue recording process, we're pretty sure about where we need to be. So it's kind of an exploration as well as a temp dialogue trial and error process. And there actually is a lot of internal talent in Borderlands 3. So not all of those voices of NPCs and enemies and things like that is all guys that we hired from the outside. Like, there's a lot of internal talent that supports our VO.
Yeah.
Okay.
So let's talk about toys. The toys you guys have at Gearbox. What is the main DAW there, and what sound engine do you use?
Our main DAW is New Window.
Yeah.
For like in-engine middleware, we use WWise.
Yeah. So was New Window always your main DAW?
No. I mean, coming from a music background, I grew up on Pro Tools since the very first version of Pro Tools. I switched this over to New Window, and when we moved into this space, my feeling there was, in looking at the progression of New Window and the kind of the feature set that they were going for, they seemed to be catering more towards the game space and the interactive space. So like everything from batch processing to being able to import XML files and automatically name large mass dumps of dialogue, those kinds of things, like those are big time savers for us, as well as the fact that the resolution of it is good, it sounds good, the interfaces are good, and I talk to the Steinberg guys often, just to see what they're doing and where they're moving and all that kind of thing. So I have a great support relationship with them. In the past, I've had issues with other DAWs and just the support and the feature set when it comes to what we do on a day-to-day basis. So New Window just seemed like the better play. Also, the session sharing between designers is really easy in New Window. And we are all on a Dante infrastructure, so every room talks to every room, and New Window plays well with that infrastructure.
How many sound designers do you have in Gearbox?
So sound designers, I have 5. 2 of them, though, one is more dedicated towards the music side. One of them, he's also a composer. Another person, Andrew, I mentioned earlier, is dedicated more towards the VO side. Through 2020, we're looking to bring on 2 more sound designers. So I'm looking to sort of build the sound design side up some more. Borderlands is a big game. It takes a lot of horsepower.
Yeah. So what are your favorite plugins, production and mixing?
We use a lot of, on the synth side, we use a lot of like S-Layer, some of the contact stuff, on the sort of other plugins, like everything from Wave Suites to Audio Ease, Multiverb, Sound Toys, all their Decapitator and other plugins are great for manipulation and sort of destroying sounds. I don't know that I have a favorite per se. Like I kind of bounce all over the place, as well as, you know, we do a lot of our own recording. So there's a lot of source stuff. If we have a good idea of what we're looking for, we try to capture it in the recording itself, and as opposed to relying on fixing it in post. So there's a lot of that goes on as well.
So what was the last inspirational game you heard regarding the sound design?
Probably one of my favorites, and this is, I feel like this is everybody's answer at times, but I love the Battlefield stuff.
Oh, yeah.
I think the sound design is really good. I think also what they do really well is, because they roll their own audio engine, the procedural mixing, the dynamic mixing for that game is really good as well. Moving away from strictly sound design, like I really enjoyed the original Red Dead game. I love the way they treated music. It felt more like it was a part of the environment, and it was very dynamic. That was something that I really wanted to push forward on BL3. We got away from using static loops and things like that, and went much more towards a vertical approach to the music system. The ambient music is broken down into sections and parts, and they randomize within each other. So you don't really hear anything the same way twice. Yet at the same time, you still get a sense of vibe and specific instrumentation to the environment as well as melody. But Red Dead did that really well in the original game. There are parts of Dead Space that I think are nice, like looking at more of the sort of suspenseful presentation of sound design. And I think the Tomb Raider stuff, there's some interesting things that were done with that. I've talked to Rob Pridgett from Eidos. We talked at AES just about how he was using Atmos and some of the treatments he did for that game, and I thought that game sounded good.
So what are your overall favorite games?
One of the games that I was hooked on for a long time was the SOCOM series, the Navy SEALs.
Oh, yeah.
I loved that game. On the PS3, you had the headset and you could give voice commands. That was the first time I had come across that in games, and I thought that was super cool. I love Zelda on the Switch. That's a lot of fun. Me and my son play that a lot. And then going back to some of the examples I gave, I played all the way through the original Red Dead. And then nowadays I have a tendency to pick up a game and I play it more from a research standpoint, like to figure out like how it sounds and what they've done and all those kinds of things. So I jump around a lot, but the Ghost Recon games, I played a lot of those. I love those games. It's kind of all over the place, really.
Yeah. So, all right. Thank you so much, Mark. Borderlands 3 is beautiful to look at and so much fun to hear. As a sound designer, I always look up to you for your great work, and please send my regards to the entire sound department of Gearbox and let them know that they have achieved something outstanding.
Great. I really appreciate your time, and thanks for reaching out about this. It's always great to talk to people who are a fan of the franchise, as well as be able to let people know sort of some insight on how we did things and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time.